So again, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar with GemServe. Today, we're going to be discussing commercialization in a digital world. During the webinar, we plan to cover key talking points, such as how cyber and data protection can enable transformation in the new normal. So first, let me tell you a little bit about GemServe. GemServe are an expert provider of professional services in a world driven by data and technology. They believe in profit for purpose, combining commercial disciplines with their desire to achieve a positive social and environmental impact. Very important. Their extensive capabilities include cyber, data protection, and digital transformation capabilities. So, joining us today are presenters Andy Green, Edward Williams, and Samuel Planty. If you guys would like to join me, and I'm going to let the audience know a little bit more about each of you. Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
Great. So I'm going to tell everybody a little bit more about Samuel first. He's a data protection expert and an IT lawyer with over 5 years of experience in providing data protection advice and an excellent knowledge of the global digital market. Thank you for joining us today, Samuel.
Thank you.
Edward is the head of digital transformation and has over 30 years experience working with leading edge and innovative technologies to realize business benefit. 30 years. I'm not going to make any comment, but you don't look like you should have 30 years of experience.
You're very kind.
Andy is a highly experienced CISO and cybersecurity leader with 18 years experience of providing subject matter expertise to a variety of clients from government departments to the commercial and financial sectors. Welcome, Andy.
Good morning, Robin. Thank you.
So just to let everybody know, throughout this webinar, please feel free to feed into the chat on the right-hand side with any questions or comments. I will keep tabs and pass them over to our speakers. Right, so with that, I'm going to pass the baton over to you, Andy, and I'll be back to follow up with any Q&A, if that's all right.
Thank you very much. So, as mentioned, my name is Andy Green. I'm the CISO and one of the managing consultants at GemServe. We've got what I think is a really important topic here today, in so much that none of us work in purely academic disciplines. We all have to interact with the business, and we all have to ensure that the business is ultimately successful. So how do we do that? How do we commercialize our areas of subject matter expertise and ensure that we are aligned with the strategic objectives and the business objectives of either the organization that we're working in, if we're an internal role such as a CISO, or if we're providing consultancy, for example, for our clients? As mentioned, I'm joined today by Ed and Sam, experts within digital transformation and data protection. And the format for today is that we've got 3 short presentations, each about 10 minutes long, followed by an element of round table to try to keep it engaging and useful to you as the audience. So onto my presentation, and what I'm going to talk about is obviously cybersecurity, and I'm going to talk about whether cybersecurity is can be a business enabler. And as mentioned, just about 10 minutes. I've got a short, non-technical presentation of about 4 or 5 slides. What I'm going to do is give you my thoughts about whether or not security can be a business enabler. Bring that to life, hopefully, with a case study of a client that I've been working with recently, and how I believe security was an enabler for that organization. And then, most importantly, to try to give you some actionable insights that you can take back to your organizations to try to embed some of this and make, if it's not already, security a business enabler within your own organizations. So let's get started then. Cybersecurity is a business enabler. Now, I'm sure within the audience, I know we've got quite a number of security specialists within the audience, but I'm sure within the non-cybersecurity audience, there's some rolling eyes, as people historically have thought of security as very much being a blocker to business. So I think my favorite that I've heard is security puts the no in technology, which made me laugh at the time. But I think historically, it's a fair point to think that security has been a blocker to business. Quite often, I've seen engagements where the project has been mapped out, and then at the last moment, security is added in as a milestone between the finished product or the finished project, if you will, and the sign-off milestone. And as a consequence, security then reviews the projects, determines that it's not as secure as it could be, and we go back round to the top of the waterfall and start from scratch, which is obviously very frustrating to the rest of the business. However, I think that perspective is changing in so much that now security is slightly better understood, and people are realizing that security needs to be built in from the outset. So we've seen initiatives such as security by default or security by design, which means that security now is far more integrated with the whole project lifecycle, meaning that it doesn't tend to be an element of a blocker for those projects, and that security is becoming far more of a business enabler. I recently read some industry analysis which stated that 70% of board who were interviewed as part of this analysis saw security as a business enabler, up from around 40% just a few years before. So it's increasingly becoming an area that the business sees as important and as a facilitator to achieving corporate objectives. Now, from my experience, I think that cybersecurity supports what I've put there is some big business objectives. So using an acronym there for it impacts and can have a positive effect on business agility, innovation, and growth. And we're going to touch on how that can be achieved. And increasingly, talking about the growth, cybersecurity can be seen as a competitive differentiator, and that can be from several different areas. So I think increasingly our customers are expecting that cybersecurity is an inherent part of our capability, and so an organization that can build trust with its customers by demonstrating robust cybersecurity is likely to be more successful than an organization that doesn't, and consequently leading to growth and as a competitive differentiator. And perhaps more from a corporate perspective, in terms of winning business as part of a supply chain, we've seen an uptick in the number of industries that are expecting cybersecurity to be present within the supply chain, and in some cases mandating it within contracts. So we've seen this from GDPR, from a GDPR perspective that Sam's going to be touching on later in the presentation, but also within UK government. The Cyber Essentials scheme, which was a UK government, a relatively light touch cybersecurity, basic hygiene and fundamentals best practice, which just looks at 5 areas of technical cybersecurity, is now being mandated in government contracts. So those organizations that have invested in achieving Cyber Essentials are going to be able to win those government contracts, where those who haven't aren't, and consequently then security is going to be a business enabler. And so just a brief case study as to where I've seen, going back to those big objectives, the business agility, addressing the first of those. I've been recently working with a large government department. And that department is a very high profile organization which impacts all of our lives within the UK. Their policies impact all of us and often have some very high profile, what I would call front page initiatives, i.e. that they're big news items within the press, if you will. And to give you a sense of scale, there are about 6,000 endpoints within this organization, operating within 5 different sites. And as you can imagine, the primary site in central London in Whitehall. And the security-enabled agility that I've seen and been a part of within that organization, a demonstration of that, is that at the initiation of lockdown from COVID-19, where we all needed to work from home, this entire organization of 6,000 endpoints was able to pivot from an architecture that was focused on working within corporate locations, so within those 5 sites, to home working, with every individual working from home, from the permanent undersecretary right the way down to the facility staff, within 1 working day, with absolutely 0 impact to service, so no interruption at all. So quite an achievement, and for a large organization in what historically has been quite a slow-moving area, if you like, government being relatively slow to embrace innovative technologies, it was cybersecurity that facilitated that agility to be able to pivot that quickly and to have no business interruption and no impact from a continuity perspective. So how was that achieved? Primarily, this department was on the front foot in terms of embracing the government's cloud first initiatives. So a lot of the services that were delivered either as software as a service or platform as a service from a cloud perspective. And perhaps more significantly, the organization had invested in a zero trust architecture. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, zero trust is a security driven architecture whereby the endpoint becomes the trust boundary for the organization. So all of the security provisions are focused on the endpoint being secure, and unlike previous architectures where the corporate network would be part of the corporate inside the corporate perimeter, if you will, then that's not trusted in a zero trust architecture. So when working in those corporate offices, even the corporate infrastructure is deemed to be untrusted. So when so you can equate that to working in a coffee shop, for example, or in a hotel or in an airport where you don't trust the network that you're connecting to. That same ethos was used when on the corporate infrastructure. Now that's facilitated by having robust encryption, and a zero trust architecture is based on that. And as a consequence of that cybersecurity, the business was enabled by a very agile way of working, so that when we needed to work from home, the whole organization was able to apply that same zero trust architecture when working on their home networks, and consequently the business was far more agile. So that's a great example of a cybersecurity acting aligning with the organization's objectives and being business enabled. So how then is that, how can we all, everybody watching is going to have slightly different architectures and business challenges. How then can we take this back to our own organizations to ensure that cybersecurity is effectively commercialized and is a business enabler? And one approach that I've seen work very successfully is the use of balanced scorecard. And so for those who haven't seen a balanced scorecard before, it's simply a strategic business tool to create projects which contribute to a strategic goal. So in this case, what we're talking about is that cybersecurity is aligning itself with the organization's objectives and the organization's strategy. And so we break that target to be a business enabler, as I just mentioned, into discrete cybersecurity related programs of work or work streams, which together build to ensure that cybersecurity is a business enabler. And using the balanced scorecard, we can track the effectiveness of each of those initiatives, and they're all mutually supportive in so much that they build together to meet those strategic objectives. The other great thing of using a technique like this is it's the language that the executive and the board understand. And so by aligning the language of cybersecurity with the language of the board, we're able to demonstrate to the wider organization that security is indeed a business enabler, and that we're all pulling in the same direction and working towards the same objectives. And so to give put a bit of meat on the bones here of what I've got here, this is an example security related balanced scorecard, which was created by Gartner as part of one of their white papers. The ID's down there, which I'd recommend, which is about security interfacing with the board. But the balanced scorecard talks about the initiatives from a financial perspective, from a customer perspective, operationally, or in the language of balanced scorecard, the internal processes, and then learning and growth. And so just taking any one of those, for example, looking at learning and growth, the initiatives that we might put in place from a security perspective is to ensure that our people are fully engaged, so that the culture of cybersecurity is embedded throughout the organization, and the people understand, our users understand their responsibility for security, that the people will make the right decisions, i.e. that they're empowered to they understand what good security, robust security behaviors look like, and they're empowered to make those decisions. We will invest in our people and develop their expertise. So, for example, training initiatives, ethical phishing campaigns, for example, to uplift their capability, and that we will protect, lastly, G4, we will protect their know-how as a competitive advantage. Now, those learning and growth, which are very much personnel-related controls, is then a facilitating set of projects which will then facilitate the internal processes, the operational objectives to the left of those. By putting in robust operational processes as a result of having a good security culture and trained individuals, that will then permeate through to the customers and deliver robust, secure customer interactions and customer service. And consequently then, that will then feed through to robust financial performance, so the growth objective that we were talking about, so making security a facilitator for organizational growth, also innovation and agility. So effectively then, using a technique such as a balanced scorecard or some other way of distilling and breaking down what our corporate objectives are into manageable, more specialist cybersecurity relating initiatives. A key component then is to have the metrics and the measurements, the key risk indicators, for example, to track the effectiveness of those projects and to ensure that they're meeting our objectives, and then managing all of that with good governance all the way through to ensure that we are aligned with the corporate objectives. So that is, in a nutshell, a very brief insight into how I believe security can be a business enabler, and the commercialization of security feeds through to effective transformation, which Ed's going to talk on and touch on in just a moment. But I'm now going to hand over to Robin to address any questions that have been raised.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. That was really great. Some really good insight and examples there.
Thank you.
I just want to look in the chat and see if there's any questions. Please feel free to post them in there. But I think on the back of that, we're going to have a little poll to get people engaged and warmed up a little bit. So if everybody wants to look over to the poll section on the right-hand side, we're going to have a poll about how much influence does cyber have in shaping your organization's digital transformation plans. So I'm just going to start that poll right now. And if everybody wants to go over on, it's the 1, 2, 3, 4th down on the right-hand side, and they can feed into that. And in the meantime, while people are doing that, I'd just like to ask, let's see, we have a question here. Can you tell us a little bit more, elaborate a little bit more on the case study for the government department that you mentioned?
Yes, by all means. It's a really interesting case, in fact, that the government department in question was very much on the front foot in embracing what is deemed to be kind of a leading edge technology in terms of zero trust. So what we have done there is used a technology called Zscaler to provide the zero trust capability. Zero trust is effectively, very simply put for those specialists within the audience, it uses PKI infrastructures, and it double encrypts. It creates one PKI tunnel from the enforcement node to the endpoint, and then it encrypts the traffic back over that, so that it gives very robust encryption and the communication from the endpoint through to the proxy, effectively, which in Zscaler terms is called an enforcement node, the Zscaler enforcement node. Policy is then applied at that enforcement node, which is a cloud-based capability, cloud-based proxy. And if that individual user has the need to know and the right to know to the data they're trying to access, then they're allowed to connect through to the cloud service that they need. So that might be through to Office 365 to get access to the productivity suite, or through to a raft of other supporting cloud services. And in that way, then, the endpoint is the trust boundary. So the endpoint needs to be secure. So we have robust encryption at rest on the endpoint. And as you'd expect, then, the other key component is to have very robust authentication mechanisms. So we have robust authentication for the user to get access to the device, and then two-factor authentication to be able to get access to those cloud services. And all of that is simplified by having single sign-on right across the estate. But by doing that, it meant that the users are able to use their device in any location. So prior to the lockdown, they were able to use their devices, as I mentioned, sort of in coffee shops or when traveling, with the same degree of security that they had when they were on the corporate network on Gov Wi-Fi. And when it came to having to have the whole organization homework, they were able to use their home networks without us needing to, as a department, look into the security or provide any policy around the home network security, because all of the security is defined by the endpoint, the encryption to the enforcement node, and then the onwards encryption to the cloud services.
Great, fantastic. We have one other question here from Laura. What are the main concerns for CISO at the moment, and how has this changed since COVID-19 struck?
Well, I think that the key area is around the protection of two areas, sorry, Laura. So I think that it's the protection of remote working. So how are we ensuring that users are remote working securely, where they sometimes are outside of the direct control of the security department in this new distributed model. And where there are technologies, as I was talking about, for example, Zero Trust to achieve that, a lot of organizations didn't have the architectures in place, and so have fallen back on perhaps ways of working that are outside of the corporate policy, perhaps just using the corporate Wi-Fi, maybe communicating with clients across social media, etc. So gaining control over that is a significant area of risk or area of concern for CISOs. And then the other area, I think, is as we perhaps return to a more traditional way of working and people are coming back into the organizations, how then do we ensure that people aren't bringing infections and viruses and threats back into the corporate organization with them if they're bringing potentially compromised devices or ways of working coming back into the new normal. I think the other area perhaps of concern is around data protection and how are we protecting the data which is being used, personal data, whilst we're working remotely. Sam, do you have anything to perhaps contribute there?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the challenge of working from home and with many organizations having their workforce working from home is that how do you make sure both that personal data that the organization is dealing with is protected on the devices of the staff, and also how it's protected in transit between your staff devices from home and your organization. And this is also one of the challenge with working remotely, because this is fairly new for many organizations, because before that most data assets were just kept on site.
Absolutely. And do you have any insights from your perspective as well, Ed? Oh, sorry, you have to turn your mic on.
One of us was going to fall for that, weren't they? So yes. So one of the things I'm seeing quite often is, I mean, both Andy and Sam have made some really valid points about remote working, ensuring your users can get at the information relevant to them, the right information at the right time, pushing that out to some of your customers. For some organizations, it's vitally important that you know who your customer is, and in the post-COVID world, that's become even more imperative from a digital perspective as well. How do you know that they are who they say they are when they're connecting with you for the first time remotely? You can't see them face to face. You can't see maybe documents that you would ordinarily look at, passports, etc. So we're seeing a rise in digital identity as being a mechanism to achieve that. Governments around the world have struggled with implementing digital identity, some with more success than others. I've worked with one island jurisdiction that has recently gone live with their digital identity solution to enable some of their government services, and that really allows you to know your customer. It's something banks have had to tackle, obviously, from a business perspective previously. Governments need to do that. If you're handing out benefits, you need to know who you're handing those benefits out to, and they're the right person. So that's another area I think of concern for CISOs at the moment, is that not only understanding that your internal staff can get at the information they need to, but your external facing stakeholders and customers are the right people that are accessing your systems and services.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm just going to take it quickly back over to the poll. So sorry about that. I had a little bit of a snafu earlier with that, but it looks like key stakeholder is the main how much influence does cyber have in shaping your organization's digital transformation plans? Key stakeholder has come out as a clear runner at 50%. Then we have interested party at 25%, and then both main stakeholder and involved retrospectively at 12% each. Interesting. Just to let you all know that for people who have put questions in the chat, I am saving them and I'll present them to everybody at the end of the session. So from here, I think, Ed, if you want to take it from here and start your presentation.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Robin. So good morning, everybody. I'm going to talk this morning around where you can leverage some commercial advantage from digital transformation, touching on how we embed cyber security and privacy best working practices all the way through this cycle. So very much, Andy alluded to security by default, security by design as paradigms. That's key throughout a digital journey. So I'll be focusing as well on capabilities of an organization and how we can look at those as a means of looking where we can gain advantage through digital, and focusing really on customers, getting the most from your customer data. We hear a lot that digital transformation is all about people, and recognizing that your users have a history, different cultural backgrounds, different views is key really to making sure we are successful in that. But at the same time, we protect by definition that customer data is really important. So I've got here a digital journey. I'd say it was a typical digital journey, but in my experience, there's no such thing really as a typical digital journey. However, it's all of these phases kind of into play with that digital journey, however you embark on it, and it's key to understand that it's an iterative process that you go through. So there's an area in strategy alignment, how your digital strategy aligns with your business strategy. The customer centricity is the area I'll perhaps touch on. More digital culture, capabilities and talent. Operational resilience, how we test our processes work, both from an operational perspective, but also from a cyber resiliency perspective as well. And how we can enable innovation, and we can do that a lot through ensuring we have high quality and well protected data. And then finally, the technology management piece is obviously a key component, but a lot of people focus overly on the technology and how to protect the technology. So some of this is around making sure that technology is one component of your digital journey. There's an awful lot more to it than that. And when we talk about customer, we need to ensure that customer experience in dealing with you is as consistent as possible. The most successful digital companies provide that consistent look and feel to the way business is done, be that over the phone, be that through your laptop or your mobile or tablet device, or face to face. There's the same feel to the business in each case, and we can only do that if we have really accurate and really high quality data that sits right at the heart of our digital services. So having that data obviously puts an onus on us. We need to protect that data, and we need to be transparent as well about how it's used and collected. Andy spoke a little about trust that people have in services digitally is key, and if they're not trusted, they're you don't enable your business digitally very effective, and you don't realize any commercial benefit. Sam will talk more about the privacy aspects. As Andy says, we know digital solutions are vulnerable to attack, and embedding that security by design ethos into the way we operate is key to making sure that is really taken care of from the top of the organization to the bottom for the first developments in a particular new service right through to implementation, and throughout that process, ensuring that your data is fully protected, privacy controls are in place and are monitored and governed right through is obviously where we need to get to. So similar to we've heard previously, I was recently involved in a project for an organisation that wanted to understand their customer better, wanted to gain a single view of their customer, and in doing that, the recommendations and the roadmap that we set forward looked at how they could minimise duplication of customer data across their organisation and increase its quality. We found that the organisation, very much similar to other organisations, had grown over time, sometimes organically, sometimes through acquisition. It meant that there were a number of duplicated data sources across their organisation for customer data, and how to bring those together was a key piece there. In doing that, looking at how their processes, and if we think of people, process, technology as being the three main areas we need to focus on through any cyber and privacy endeavor, ensuring the processes are robust and automating where possible allows us to focus more on the process and the technology, removing people to the largest extent possible from that, as well as enabling a more efficient digital organization. Looking for the best fit solutions and how we are able to deliver robust, highly secure systems where we have siloed information, how we can open that up to the rest of the organization, and moving to that customer focused view. So there's an element of this that needs to understand the demographics that of your customer base, how they operate, whether they use mobiles more than desktop applications, and how we can secure better those channels. In terms of the organization itself, one technique we use frequently is around business capabilities. Now, when we talk about business capabilities, this is an enterprise architecture construct. For those who are familiar with it, you will understand the value of it. Those who have never really looked at their organization through the lens of business capabilities, it's a powerful tool to understand what it is your organization does, rather than necessarily how it does it. So it provides the link between your digital strategy and your digital activities that you undertake to achieve that strategy. The link between what the executive is looking to achieve and how you put in place some projects of work to deliver on that. And by focusing on what we do and what we should do, really, rather than how we actually do it, we can look at dividing those capabilities into a set of groupings. I wouldn't be a consultant if I didn't have some kind of quadrant on my screen at some point. So typically we might look at those that, in terms of how much value they offer to the customer, and how much financial impact there is if they are not they're not effectively run and managed. So the ones at the top there, the strategic capabilities and the advantage capabilities, those are typically the ones with the highest value to the customer. And the advantage ones are the ones where you need to really focus on your digital delivery, because you need to be able to communicate with your customer in the way they want to communicate. So an example of a capability might be opening up your front end service delivery to different channels. The strategic ones are ones where you can perhaps afford to be more innovative. So a number of organisations I've worked with, organisations like Transport for London, like the Land Registry, they work a lot with data, which has value to other third-party organisations. So they do a lot of work around open data to commercialise that data and make it more available. Open data doesn't necessarily imply free data, of course. You can open your data and have charging models in there. And then the ones below the threshold of the higher customer value, the ones which are nonetheless absolutely even necessary for your organization or indeed essential for your organization, are those ones that often we need to look at, because this is where a lot of attacks might well occur to seek out the vulnerabilities in some of your back-end applications. And Service Desk is an example as well of an area where you can invest in that to, for example, not only deal with customer-facing inquiries, but also any cyber attacks that you might be subject to, dealing with those quickly and efficiently. And similarly, business continuity, where you don't necessarily provide frontline value to your customer, but nonetheless, if there is an example of somewhere where your business will suffer hugely if you can't continue business in the face of different circumstances, then you will suffer a huge financial impact. And Andy spoke there about the move in his case study from at desk working to remote working during the COVID-19 pandemic. Ensuring the business operates seamlessly through that is an area of investment where you can reduce the risk and reduce the cost as a result when events occur. So one thing we've learned through digital transformation and your experience, I'm sure, with a number of digital companies, is there's a move away from traditional charging to more innovative ways of charging your customers for the services you offer. Now, I remember buying Microsoft Office some years ago when it was time to upgrade. It was a one-off cost up front, and those one-off costs often are barriers to people buying services in a digital world. So a number of models have developed as a result of that. Microsoft themselves have moved more to the subscription Office 365 model. Freemium models are common in the gaming industry, where you often start with a fairly basic free service, but the value adds are the things that cost you money. And there are others, the on-demand service, the ecosystem, companies like Apple who develop a suite of products and services that all work well together in an ecosystem. And the last one really is the free model, and I'm sure we all use many free digital services out there. Most common probably is Facebook still. But we all know deep down they're not free at all. Free models trade information for the service that you receive. And there has become, as we know, an increasing public awareness of, as well as the concerns over the privacy and the use of personal information in those free models, and an increased concern over the use of algorithms as well. We've obviously we're coming off the back of summer and A-level results and all of the controversy around the use of algorithms. And again, another quadrant for you there. So perceived value and the supplier reputation this time. Depending on how you offer your services, you need to ensure that you innovate in those areas in the way you charge in order to receive that benefit. But if you don't protect your data, behave ethically there, and maintain your reputation, you could fall into the realms of being an application that at best is tolerated if the customer value is high, but feared to be used if the value isn't so great and your reputation is poor. Finally, if I'd give 3 recommendations to focus on your organization and your customer base in order to leverage benefit, it's understand your business drivers and your customer requirements, but use those tools and techniques like the balanced scorecard to ensure that you understand the risks and your risk appetite for your organization from the outset. Ensure that you build single sources of high quality information. Try to avoid siloed information. Try to avoid unknown siloed information where parts of your business have embarked on using web-based or cloud-based solutions without engaging with the rest of the organization. So work for the entire business and model your customer data in that way. If you do this, you'll build your services based around how customers want to interact with you. You will achieve that digital customer-centric model. You'll only do this if you really have someone within the organization who is speaking up for the customer and engages with the customer, and also protects the customer's interests, and through that privacy of that customer data, and through that ensuring it's kept secure from the very get-go of any digital initiative. So that's all I really had to say this morning. If I can hand back to Robin to take any questions we have.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ed. That's really interesting about the people, processes, and technology, and sort of that symbiosis there. I also love a good quadrant, so never apologize. I have a quick question from Andy Lovett. So this is, by securing access for internal users, how does that translate to customers wanting to access a commercial business services through digital engagement rather than face-to-face in the old world, if that?
So there's a number of answers to this. I think depending on what services you offer, you might be very interested in knowing who your customer is. I referred to this in the last session at the end of Andy's session. So enabling some form of digital identity, and there are a number of off-the-shelf solutions available, and there are a number of bespoke solutions that you can look to develop and tailor off the back of those. But effectively, they use a number of techniques to ensure that, in the first instance, that you are a real person. Liveness tests. You're not a robot trying to connect with services. They can also do the validation that on official documents that would normally be done in a face-to-face interaction. For example, if you go to open a new bank account and you have to show up with your passport and your utility bill and various other documents to prove you are who you are and where you live, there's a number of digital solutions out there that will enable that to be done remotely, and then you can have a degree of confidence that you are working with the customer that you believe you're working with. From there are a number of techniques around enabling multi-factor authentication for those customers to make sure that once you know who they are and they've established connectivity with you and using your services, and they come back in a repeat way, they are the same people that they were on the previous iteration, to avoid somebody being able to pose as someone on a subsequent interaction.
Mm-hmm. Great. And do you have anything to add to that, Andy? Oh, you're on mute, darling.
I'm not guilty of being the only one.
Andy, do you have anything to add to that? Oh, you're still on mute. No.
Oh no.
Okay, well, Samuel.
Technically, yeah.
Samuel, do you have any thoughts from a privacy perspective or GDPR?
Well, no, it's It's very interesting questions to take into account, and both you can see when you start your digital transformation journey that both privacy and security have to be taken from the beginning in the design, and they are very tightly connected together, because the ensuring the privacy on in a digital space is also making sure that the data is kept securely and is transiting securely, and it's all very accurate and very relevant points indeed. I'll talk a bit more in my own section about all of that, but there are very important points, and knowing your customer as well is also very important for organizations, and it does come with its own privacy challenges, depending on how you want to perform that.
Fantastic. Well, from there, actually, I'm going to leave it with you to start your presentation. We have a really interesting question about AI, but I'm going to come to that after your presentation's finished. So,
okay,
over to you, Samuel.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So I'm Samuel Plantier. I'm principal consultant at GemServe, and I'm specialized in data protection and privacy. And my part is going to focus on really the privacy challenges of moving your business to digital. If this is a journey you are doing, and so we're going to touch on security, on data minimization, international transfers, marketing communications, and digital advertising, which there are many other points we could talk about in data protection, but we don't have all day. So I'm going to mainly focus on these ones, which I think are perhaps the most relevant for a digital transformation journey. So as it has been very well covered by both Andy and Ed, the one of the main point to focus on when you move digital is going to make sure that your data assets are kept securely, and that your website, your customer database, everything is secured with state-of-art standards. And the reason is that having a data breach is both can have both serious consequences, both for your organization's reputation and also for your customers. And for the it means that you may have to contact your customers, you may have to notify the breach to a supervisory authority like the ICO. So it may have serious consequences if you overlook this point. And a few main areas to focus on are, if you are processing payments and credit card details, you'll want to make sure that the details are kept securely and in a way that is not able to be useful for unlawful recipients if the data is out into nature. If you are processing sensitive data such as, I don't know, passport details, for instance, ID information, or health data, depending on your business, you want to make sure that this data is kept extremely securely as well, by encryption and by segregation, for instance, and with information that can be used in general for identity thefts. In terms of another point to take into account is going to be data minimization, which is one of the principles of the GDPR, and that any organization has also to take into account. And especially when moving digital, it can be very tempting to collect as much as data as possible from your customers to profile and or for marketing analytics purposes, as you knowing your customers, as Ed was mentioning, and it has to be done in a certain way. So you only need to collect what is necessary and proportionate, and this is also something that is important, connected to my previous slide on security. It's keeping your data minimal is also helping you to reduce the impact of a data breach. raise your customers' trust if you ask for information that is not really required for your business, such as, I don't know, date of birth, for instance, if it's not something you're actually going to use. Asking too much information might lower your customers' trust. A bit more on that later on marketing and profiling, but I wanted also to touch on international transfers, and which is a very important element when going digital and when moving a business online. You're always going to find to use cloud providers or service providers that are probably going to be located outside of the UK or the EU. And this area has been extremely moving in the past month. So basically, what you need to know as an organization is that data transfers outside of the EU and the UK are limited if you are not implementing a proper safeguard. In particular, transfer to the US can be a challenge because the Privacy Shield, which was a framework allowing companies to transfer data from the EU to the US without implementing further safeguards, have been invalidated last month, and it means that a lot of organizations need to find another way to transfer data to the US. And as you know, a lot of cloud providers and service providers are usually based in the US, or some of them, some very large ones, are based in the US and are going to transfer data in servers to the US. And one of the key elements now, as your solution to avoid having to focus too much on your compliance, is either to choose suppliers and providers who have servers in the UK and the EU to simplify your data flows and your compliance journey, or if you are using providers that are based in the US, you will need to assess whether they can actually receive the data in a compliant way, and if they are going to be able to comply with their obligations, because this was the main issue that has been raised in the recent court case. Like the US laws, and especially surveillance laws, were not actually allowing US-based companies to comply with their obligations under the GDPR. And so international transfers is going to be one of the key area you want to focus on as well. In terms of marketing communications, there is something that is worth noting here. Especially when you move an existing customers database and physical customers database, and you move your business to digital, the only situation where you can actually send marketing communications to your existing customer database is when it's pre-existing online customers. If you are moving your physical customers to an online database, to your online business, you will need actually their consent if you want to send direct marketing communications to them. And this is something worth noting, because the only situation where you can rely on opt-out to send direct marketing communications is actually fairly limited, and it's only for existing customers, online customers. So if you want to move your existing physical customers database, you will need to secure their consent, to secure their opt-in, and it can be a bit deterrent, but the ICO is actually very focused on this point, and is issuing some fines in respect of the breach of e-privacy and PECA for uncompliant direct marketing communications. And on digital advertising and cookies, and more generally on knowing your customers and to connect with ads, with what Ed was saying earlier. So especially when you have your business online, it can be most of the time it's widely common now to perform analytics and digital advertising, to retarget or to remarket your visitors, or to know your audience, to know your customers, and also in going further on that, to perform business intelligence, business analytics on your customer database. And there are really two things here. So in terms of digital advertising and analytics, when you implement cookies on visitors' devices, you actually need consent. This is the only legal basis that you can use. You cannot rely on legitimate interest and opt out, although it's very confusing at the moment, because the ICO isn't really moving forward in the enforcement of that on the back of COVID-19, because they are really busy dealing with a lot of different issues. But the current state of the guidance and the law is that you need consent to perform analytics and digital advertising, and all technologies are in scope. It's not only cookies; it's also scripts, pixel beacons, tags, unique identifiers, etc. And on business intelligence, and to connect with the news, and what's also another important point that organizations may do. So in general, when you have a customer database, it can be interesting for your own knowledge to know your customers, to do data analytics on that, and you're going to draw some profiling, some trends, some information from that. And I think one lesson we have learned from that, and from the A-level scandals, is that when you do that, you're usually going to use AI solutions which are going to do that for you. And I think you need to be very careful on the data ethics perspective to make sure that trends, the profiling you are going to do, depending on your business, are not going to be biased. And so it's not just a matter of implementing an AI solution that you found extremely interesting from a service provider, from an AI solution provider. It's also making sure that you implement that in a ethical and compliant way, because the scandal that can result from that can be massive. Of course, perhaps not at the A-level level, but AI is already here, and the issues that happened recently in the news are not specific to A-level, it's specific to everything, because necessarily the data you are mostly going to feed into these algorithms is going to be biased in itself, because this is how the world is. An AI solution is only going to deliver an algorithm is only going to deliver on the data that it's fed with. It's not going to avoid the biases in itself. So you need to really assess your solution and to make sure that the proper safeguards are implemented when you want to both drawing profiling and analytics from your own data, but also if you want to implement automated decision systems such as recommendations, but also credit rating, or making sure on whether a customer is more entitled to one product than another. And this is, I think, from the news, this is really something that we need to be really aware of, as many organizations and are thinking implementing such system, especially in a moment where a lot of businesses are moving online, are moving digital, and are trying to make the most of the data they have. And on the last point for me on cookie banners, so this is an example of a compliant cookie banner. with a bit of guidance drawn from the ICO and the rest of the European data protection authorities guidance and guidelines. So except for strictly necessary cookies and technologies, no box should be protected. Preferences, statistics, digital advertising, analytics, all of that should be kept as unticked boxes. The purposes should be separated. So no, by coming on our website, you agree to the use of cookies. This is not compliant. This is not lawful. You should link to your cookies policy, and you should also list the third parties that you are using on your website. So, for instance, Google Analytics, Facebook, and all other AdTech companies you might going to use on your website as tracking technologies. You should also make the inventory and give the information to your visitors on the. I think that's all from me. Robin, over to you if you have any question, if there is any question.
Great, thank you, Samuel. Yeah, that's great. It was great for having you illuminate a little bit an area that you said obviously can be a bit opaque at times, especially at the moment. So everybody, I know we're a bit over time, but let's see. I've got 2 last questions for you all. Both are from David. You kind of touched on this in your last session in this presentation, but you touched on AI and some concerns. The question is, AI has had some challenges recently, but if deployed properly, safely, do you think AI could help to bind cyber and digital transformation together?
It's a very interesting question, and one thing I like to say is that AI is not necessarily going to be implemented on your data assets, personal data assets. So an AI solution isn't necessarily going to raise some issues as it had with A levels, for instance, because it can be, for instance, one thing I know that a few services that are out there is, for instance, AI systems that are monitoring your network and your data assets again to protect against cyber threats. And in that case, you wouldn't necessarily run into the same issues as you would have that we saw recently in the news. Perhaps Andy or Ed can tell us more on that, though.
Yeah, absolutely. Can I pass that over to you, Ed?
Yeah, sure. I've got a long history with AI, and I find it quite fascinating that throughout that history, a lot of AIs remain a black box in terms of the information they're providing you with from the inputs you've been given it, and whether it's really what you're looking for, or whether they're being influenced by other facets of the data which you didn't even realize was there. And this is what obviously brings in all of the bias type concerns that exist at the moment. But nonetheless, I mean, it's a technology through digital that's been coming more and more into its own in terms of being deployed more and more usefully. But as with all things, it's understanding what your requirements are and making sure that you're meeting a real business requirement with your deployment of AI in the first instance, rather than being seduced by some digital technology that you've seen working really well in the press or somewhere else at a trade show. Does it actually make a difference for you and deliver benefit for you? And then making sure that you design that in fully and appropriately, putting in your checks around the data you're using to try and eliminate the risk of bias, and building it in a secure environment so that it can't be tampered with if you're exposing a vulnerability through its use. So, I mean, the broad answer to the question is yes, in a way. It ties them together, but it's an enabler for digital, but only really if it's done securely and with ethical and privacy considerations.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. And do you have anything to add to that, Andy? Or are you still on silent? That's strange. Your microphone is still not working. Okay. Well, I'm sorry, Andy. I'm sure it's gold, what you have to add.
It was the single nugget that everyone would take away from this webinar.
Well, then the last question. Oh, actually, you know what? Well, I'm going to ask everybody, but it's sort of about enablement from Andy's perspective. But the concept of cyber as an enabler is all well and good. But have you seen ways or scenarios where positioning cybersecurity as an enabler has helped to secure budget for innovation, or where innovation digital transformation projects have helped to secure budget for cybersecurity? So maybe, again, this is something to go to you, Ed.
Yeah, sure. Andy used the analogy of it's cyber that puts the no in technology, and my favourite one is the analogy that said when the motor car was first being introduced onto the roads and serious work was being looked at into the braking systems. The braking systems aren't there to slow you down. The braking systems are there to enable you to go faster, more safely, in that knowledge. And the same view needs to be taken, I think, of cyber. It gives you the safe area in which to innovate. I think innovation can take many forms, and often it's the people who work day in, day out in your business who have that light bulb moment about how to make your business run more smoothly through some innovation that they've suddenly woken up to. How you then marshal and prioritize and deliver on that innovation, you need a framework in place, I think, that encourages that to be delivered safely. So I think cyber can help innovation, but you've got to, it's a change of mindset as much as anything else. It's not putting the no in technology. It's enabling you to innovate with a degree of safety.
Fantastic. Is there anything that you could add from your perspective, Samuel, on that?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, and how to make sure that, well, both privacy and security are enablers. I think this is the way how you present that to the board or to the senior stakeholders in the company. And it's not only a matter of presenting the risks and the risk in case of a breach or anything. It's more presenting what are the benefits of being compliant and what are the benefits of having a secure network, both in terms of the risk avoided, but also on the technologies you can implement to also facilitate your business, and both on the privacy and on a security perspective, and how implementing processes such as privacy by design when you develop a new project, how we can help design your products more efficiently, and how we can help also making sure that you keep a relationship of trust with your customers. And these are very important points as well that sometimes are overlooked. And I think this is how you gain really the support from inside the organization. How you make sure that the whole organization is behind the transformation journey, in implementing security and privacy.
Mm-hmm. So it has to be sort of everybody invested. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I think I'm just going to check if there's not one more question, but no, I think that's it for today. We've gone a little bit over time, but that's fine. Thank you all out there for joining GemServe today, looking at digital transformation from the cybersecurity, data protection, and data transformation perspective and how they sort of interrelate. I want to thank you, Andy, Ed, and Samuel, for your insights, your advice, and giving us some great ideas to consider. Also, thank you from us at Executive Leaders Network for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Robin.
And bye.
Have a great day. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.